This Sicha is a siyum, a hadrin on Masechta Eruvin, and it's connected with a posuk in the parsha. The Rebbe starts off the Sicha by saying that on the posuk al yetze ish memkoimei, a person shouldn't go out from his place by Yom HaShvi on the seventh day. The Razal tell us, and Rashi brings this, Elu al payim amos, this refers to the 2,000 amos. One shouldn't go out 2,000 amos in Tchum Shabbos. That means from this posuk we learn out the Isser, the prohibition, to go out of the Tchum of 2,000 amos, out of the city, out on Shabbos. Now, in regards to the dinim of Tchum Shabbos, there's a machloikus of Rab Shimon and Rabbanon in Masechta Eruvin in the end of Perek Daled. This is what the Mishnah says. Someone that started off Shabbos outside the Tchum, so he was outside the city. According to the first opinion in the Mishnah, even if he's just one amma outside the Tchum Shabbos, so that means he is 2,001 amos outside the city, he's not allowed to go in to the Tchum, so he wouldn't be allowed to enter the Tchum and not allowed to enter the city on Shabbos. Reb Shimon says that even up till 15 amos past the Tchum Shabbos, past the marker of the Tchum Shabbos, he is allowed to go in. Reb Shimon's reasoning is in the Mishnah, because the people that measured the Tchum Shabbos, that put the markers there, didn't put it in the accurate place, in the exact place of the end of the Tchum Shabbos, because of people possibly making a mistake. In other words, that Reb Shimon holds, that when they would measure and mark off the place of where the 2,000 amos is, they weren't very, very precise and accurate to put it at the very end of the 2,000 amos. Rather, they would bring it in a little bit, approximately around 15 amos, so that people that don't know exactly where it is, where the 2,000 amos ends, and they think that it's, in other words, they went a little bit past, so they still are within the area of which they would be permitted to go back. So they went back, and they possibly went a little bit far, so we give them this extra leeway, so to speak. And therefore, if a person started off Shabbos just after the Tchum, as long as he's within these 15 amos, that's past the marker of the Tchum Shabbos, he is allowed to go in, because what we're saying is that in truth, he is really within the 2,000 amos of the Tchum. This logic of Rab Shimon, this reason of Rab Shimon, is told to us as a klal, as a general rule, much further in the Masechta, in the very, very last Mishnah of the Masechta, and the end of Perek Yud. And this is what Rab Shimon says. Rab Shimon says the following words, which we're going to try to understand afterwards what they mean. But let's first start off with a simple meaning. Rab Shimon says, Makoim she'itiru lecha chachamim, the place where the chachamim have allowed you, mishelcha nasnu lecha. What they really gave you was something that belonged to you from the outset. Shelo yitiru lecha ela mishum shvus, because the only thing they permitted for you was that which was a shvus. What does this mean? So the Gemara explains that Reb Shimon is coming over here to explain the reason for two different halachos. The first part of Reb Shimon's statement, Makim she'itiru lecha chachamim mishalcha nasnu lecha, is referring back to this din that we were discussing about the Tchum Shabbos. That if someone started off Shabbos outside the Tchum, Reb Shimon says that even if it's up till 15 amos, he could enter the Tchum. He's explaining in the current Mishnah, the end of the Masechta, that this is because this area, this space of the 15 amos is really belongs to you anyways. You were really allowed to be there because it's within the Tchum Shabbos. These 15 amos really weren't past the Tchum. And therefore, what the Chachamim are giving you, Mishalcha Nasnu Lecha, what they gave you, is really what belongs to you, and therefore you could go in to the Tchum Shabbos. As long as it's within the 15 amos, you're really within the Tchum Shabbos, and that's why the Chachamim are allowing you to go in. The next part of the Mishnah, when Reb Shimon says, Shalohi tiru lecha, all the Chachamim allowed you was elo mishum shvus, only that which is a shvus, is referring to another Mishnah, which is earlier on in Perek Yud. The Mishnah there is referring to tying a string in the Beis HaMikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, you would be allowed to tie a string This is referring to a broken string of an instrument, but not outside the Beis HaMikdash. That's if it broke on Shabbos. If you're tying it lechatchila, you wouldn't be allowed even in the Beis HaMikdash. Whereas Reb Shimon says, in a Baraisa which the Gemara brings, Reb Shimon says on Ben Levi, shenifsek aloi nima bekina koishra, where the first Tana says, like what the Gemara just said, what the Mishnah just said, that if a Levi's harp broke, the string broke, you would be allowed to make a knot, you would be allowed to tie it. Comes along Reb Shimon and says, no, oinva, you could only make a bow, a slip knot. What's the reason? So now in the end of the Masechta, which we quoted before, here is what the Mishnah is telling us why we're allowed to do it. What does this mean? The Gemara explains that when it comes to a bow, since there's no way this is going to bring you to doing an Aveira Midorai, so you'll never be Chayiv Chatos from making the bow, therefore the Chachamim are allowing you to do that on the harp. Whereas making a knot, which could bring to a Chiyuv Chatos, here the Chachamim wouldn't allow. And this is what he was saying, Shalahitiru lecha ela mishum shvus. What exactly is he saying? What's the connection between these two statements? So the Rebbe brings now Rashi and Tosfos. So Rashi explains like this. Reb Shimon is telling the Tanakama, even though I was lenient when it comes to the person starting off Shabbos outside the Tchum, nevertheless, I'm going to be strict when it comes to the string on the harp. Why is that? Because over there, in the case of Tchum Shabbos, what the Chachamim allowed you to go in the Tchum Shabbos was lechatchila only that which was yours anyways. You were anyways within the Tchum Shabbos. But over here, in the case of the bow, the only thing that they would allow you to do is only something that's a shvus. So only something that's lechatchila midrabbanan would they allow you to do it. Whereas Tosfos says the following. In the previous case, in the case of the Tchum Shabbos, it wasn't really even a leniency, because what the Chachamim are allowing you to go in belongs to you anyways. Says Reb Shimon, the same things over here. What the Chachamim are allowing you to do is something that you're allowed to do anyways, which means the bow, the slip knot, which you would be allowed to do anyways. In other words, according to Tosfos, both of these halachos are really the same reasoning, that the Chachamim are only allowing you to do what you would be technically allowed to do anyways. In the case of Tchum Shabbos, the 15 amos is anyways really part of the 2,000 which you'd be allowed. It's not an extra 15 amos. In the case of the bow, you're not being allowed to do anything that you would be allowed to do anyways, because you're allowed to make a bow on Shabbos. So the Rebbe says we need to understand both Rashi and Tosfos. According to Rashi, what is the connection b'chalal between these two halachos? What did Rashi say? That even though I was lenient in the case of Tchum Shabbos, nevertheless, over here, I'm being strict. Says the Rebbe, what's the connection between two different dinim that have seemingly no connection to each other, that because of that, Reb Shimon is telling us that I am strict in one din and I'm lenient in the other? Would we think that just because I'm lenient in the din of Tchum Shabbos, that makes me be more strict? That's why I should be lenient in the tying of the knot of the Beis HaMikdash? That Reb Shimon has to say that even though I am lenient over here, I'm still going to be strict over here? According to Tosfos, we need to understand, Tosfos says that it's the same logic that makes me be lenient in the case of Tchum Shabbos as what's making me be strict in the case of the string. The question then is, all the Gemara had to say, all the Mishnah had to say that Reb Shimon says is Makoim sheitiru lecha chachamim mishalcha nasnu lecha. That when the Chachamim gave you a heter, it's only that which you could have done anyways. There's nothing more that needs to be added. That same reasoning is the reason why Reb Shimon is going to be machmir by the broken string, that he's telling you, sorry, you cannot make a knot. The only thing you could do is something that you'd be allowed to do anyways, which is making the bow. So why does Reb Shimon need to add those words, Shalohi tiru lecha elo mishum shvus, that the only things Chachamim would allow you to be done is only something that's a shvus. By the way, just to clarify, didn't translate before the word shvus. Shvus is a term usually used when it comes to an isur that's only midirabanan on Shabbos, where there's an extra rest that the Chachamim are placing on us on Shabbos. So why, again, isn't it enough that Reb Shimon should just say the initial point that whenever the Chachamim allow you to do something, it's something that you would be allowed to do anyways? Especially that we know that the Lashon of the Mishnah, generally the Mishnah tries to be brief, and the brief expressions of the Mishnah will include many, many details. So why does he have to add these words? Another question, which is more of a general question. These words of Reb Shimon that we just quoted are at the very end of a Mishnah that's actually discussing a completely different halacha. The halacha of a sheretz, of a dead sheretz that was found in the Beis HaMikdash, which seemingly has no connection at all to these other halachas that we just brought. So therefore, either this statement of Reb Shimon, which was a reason for two different halachas, one of Perik Daled, one earlier in Perik Yud, should have either been placed next to one of those Mishnahs, or, if placing it over here at the end of the Masechta, at least in a Mishnah for itself. In order to explain this, the Rebbe says, we're first going to look at a general idea that it says that mitzvah lachzoir bein achar eruvei chatzeres bein achar shitufei mevoyos, which means that it's actually a mitzvah to make what's called an eruv chatzeros. Eruv chatzeros is when you have a situation of a courtyard with many, many different houses, and you need to make an eruv out of food so that the different houses could carry within the shared property. Shitufei mevoyos is a similar sort of idea when it's a bunch of courtyards and they share one alley. So again, they need to participate in food so that the different courtyards could all use that shared alley. But it says in Sfarim that it's actually not only you are allowed to do it, but mitzvah lachzor. It's actually a good idea to make such a native. What's the reason for this? So one of the reasons is because it's for the benefit of the person that he could then stroll and carry his food over there, and all of that is a mitzvah. There's a concept of a karosel l'Shabbos oinig. We want to make that Shabbos should be in an enjoyable way. So the Rebbe applies the same idea over here, that because of oinig Shabbos, there would actually be a mitzvah to try to be within the city, or within the tchum of the city, within the area of the city, so that you could walk there, that you could bring things in the whole area of the city and the 2,000 amos surrounding it in all directions. Because if a person is stuck, so to speak, outside the Tchum Shabbos, he's very, very limited in all of these areas. Clearly, this would be the opposite of Oinig Shabbos. Based on this, says the Rebbe, when Reb Shimon is discussing the idea of a person that started Shabbos Chutz L'Tchum, Reb Shimon is not only saying, says the Rebbe, that he's allowed to go in if he's within the 15 amos, but actually he should go in. There's an obligation for him to go in, so that he shouldn't be missing out the union of Oinig Shabbos, which would be like an Isur. For the full 24 hours, he would be missing out on Oinig Shabbos. If this is the way we look at it, says the Rebbe, now we could start understanding Reb Shimon's reasoning that it's all coming from one general nekuda. And that is a discussion, that's a topic that's looked at in many, many places, of what outweighs which one. Is it the quality or the quantity? That means when you have a quantity but not so much quality. On the other hand, you have quality with not so much quantity. Which one is more powerful? Which one is stronger? And Reb Shimon is looking at it that quantity is going to outweigh the quality. How does this work? So the Rebbe explains, based on what we just said, that Reb Shimon would say, Yikones, you should actually go into the city. Not only it's optional, you can go into the city, but you should go into the city. And we said, what's the reason for that? So that you shouldn't be having that isur of missing Oinig Shabbos. So now let's look at the opposite side of it. When a person is going to go in to the Tchum Shabbos, l'cha'oira, he is being over here on something, on the idea of going outside of the Tchum, in other words, from outside of the Tchum to inside of the Tchum, and he's doing actually an action by doing it. Just to clarify, even though we said before that technically he is within the Tchum Shabbos, but it's not so straightforward, meaning, again, it's not so clear in the Sicha, but this is from the Ha'aris, from the general Mefarshim of the Gemara. I just want to clarify that, and the Rebbe points some of this out in the Ha'aris as well, even Rav Shimon would agree that a person is not allowed lechatchila on Shabbos to go outside past the Tchum Shabbos into those 15 Amos. It's only if he started off Shabbos there. And there's many other reasons why those 15 Amos could still be problematic. So there is some Isser over here of going through this area of these 15 Amos, which is, we're counting it as past the marker of Tchum Shabbos. Now, this would definitely be a more serious thing than missing out on Oinig Shabbos by staying out in the place where he started out Shabbos. And furthermore, it's only Sheva Al Tasi, he's not even doing an action. And nevertheless, what does Reb Shimon hold? Rather go into the Tchum Shabbos. And why is that? Because that's only going to be for one moment, that Isur. Whereas when you're staying outside the Tchum, this is something that's continuing now over the whole Shabbos. And in Reb Shimon's opinion, the greater quantity is going to outweigh the quality. So even though in quality there's a stronger Isur in the Tchum Shabbos, nevertheless in the quantity, here you have a whole Shabbos missing out on Oinig Shabbos. Again, just to clarify, we're never discussing over here if the person was outside for sure out of the 2,000 Amos. We're speaking about that more questionable or gray area of the 15 Amos. Says the Rebbe in Sif Gimel, based on this, that the reason for Rab Shimon that he holds that you should go in is because the quality outweighs the quantity outweighs the quality. We can now start understanding the connection between the two rules that Reb Shimon said in the reasoning for the two different halachos. He said, the place where the Chachamim allowed you is they only gave you that which is yours. And the other rule that we said, that when the Chachamim allow you something, it's only Mishum Shvus, something that's a Derabanan. How does it connect? So the Rebbe says, now let's look at the story with the harp. The two different ways how the harp could be fixed. Making a knot or making a bow. Here too, we'll see that each one has in some way that it's more strict and more severe than the other. On the one hand, the idea of making a knot is clearly stricter because it could end up being a chiyuv chatos. So this is in quality, this is definitely going to be a more severe inyan. Whereas a bow is only going to be a derabanan. Again, the Rebbe does not go into the Sicha over here why making a bow at all is a derabanan. There's a number of different ways in the Gemara to understand that. The Rebbe doesn't discuss that over here. Perhaps it's the reason because if you're making the aniva with the intention, you're trying that it should last. So according to many, that would be considered asur midrabanan, etc. But the point is, so in the aniva, it's only midrabanan because it's definitely easy to come apart and it's not going to be a permanent knot. Says the Rebbe, but on the other hand, there is a certain stringency in the aniva, in the bow, because since it's not going to last, it's very, very likely you're going to have to fix the harp, fix the string to make this bow a number of times. So what do we have over here? More in quantity, because you're going to end up having to make this Isser D'Rabbanan a number of times. Whereas when you made that one-time knot, yes, you're doing the Isser, but it's only one time. So in other words, to solve this question, which should be done, the knot or the bow, seemingly would be the same question. Does quality outweigh quantity or the opposite? So now, once Reb Shimon told us in the previous halacha about a person outside the Tchum Shabbos should go in. And what was the reason we said? Because quantity is the one that outweighs. So what should he say over here by the harp? Seemingly, Reb Shimon should be the one that would say that you should dafka make a knot, because then you're going to have less in quantity. You're only going to have to do it one time, like that person by the Tchum Shabbos, he's only going in one time, rather than making a bow, because he's going to have to do it many, many more times. That's where Reb Shimon is coming to negate in this halacha. And he says, meaning to say, yes, it's true, I was more lenient when it came to the quality of an Isser of Tchum, because I wanted that you shouldn't have an Isser many, many times. But why over here am I being more strict when it comes to the quality of the knot versus the bow? Is because of the second statement that he says, meaning to say, the only time I can allow such a thing is if the quality and the quantity are both in the same category. If they would both be the Rabbanons, then I could say that quantity outweighs quality. In other words, if they both belong to the same kind of Isser, either they're both the Isser D'Oraisa or both the Isser D'Rabbanon. Where is it when it comes to the fixing of the kinoir, of the harp? There's no way that the greater quantity of making a bow many times, which is only Midrabbanon, that's definitely not going to outweigh the making a knot, which could bring you to the D'Oraisa. And on the contrary, the eichos, the quality of the Issa D'Oraisa, will definitely outweigh the Rabbanon, and that's why Reb Shimon says over here that we make a bow and not a knot. The Rebbe goes ahead and brings a proof to this idea, that we can't mix different kind of Isurim and start weighing them against each other, quality and quantity. So the Alter Rebbe has a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. You had a choyle sheyesh bo sakana, a choyle that was critically ill, and he needs meat. We are allowed to shecht it for him on Shabbos. Now the Alter Rebbe says, hold on a second. Why don't we say, better have him eat from an animal that was killed by a goy, let's say, called a nevela, right, or an animal that died. Now this Isser would only be a lav, that means it's only a chiyuv malkus, and rather than being mechalel Shabbos, which is an Isser skila. So why are we so sure that to shecht an animal would be the best idea? So the Alter Rebbe gives a similar logic to what we said before, that by the Isser nevela, there's going to be an Isser on every single kazayis the person is going to eat. So we have quantity. Whereas shchita, he's only doing the Isser at one moment, even though it's a stricter thing, because the Isser skila, and nevertheless it's just for one moment. Says the Alter Rebbe, but now let's look at another case. Let's say a case where the choyle, the sick person, needs to have wine boiled up for him. And now the issue over here is that we may come to a situation of stam yenam, of a goy handling wine. So the Alter Rebbe says like this: Yemale Yisrael, a yid should be the one to fill up the wine in the pot. A goy then could go and cook it up. The Alter Rebbe says, because in this case, the most that could happen is that the goy may touch it, but that's going to be called stam yenam, which is only a derabbanon. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. In other words, what does he say? That it's only when we compare two Isurim, that they're both midoiraisa, for example, in the first case, right, nevela versus shechting on Shabbos. So we'll say that the quantity over here is going to be more strict than the quality of the Isur of shechting on, right? So shechting on Shabbos, because it's only a one-time thing, that's a better idea. Whereas when it comes to the Isur of the Rabbanon, stam yenom, which is again, technically it's an inyan of a ribui bekamos, more kamos, because he's drinking every little bit of wine, or every time he drinks the wine is going to be an Isur. So here we'll say that since there's a Irais over here, that will outweigh the Isur D'Rabbanon, and that's why we'll say that the Goy should cook it and not the Yid. Okay, says the Rebbe, based on all of this, we can now connect it all also to the statement of Rav Shimon of the Mishnah. Why this statement of Rav Shimon comes in the Mishnah at the end of the Mishnah that we said before of a sheretz, of a dead sheretz that was found in the Beis HaMikdash. And why doesn't it come as a Mishnah for itself? Says the Rebbe, because really this Mishnah itself is also dealing with the same issue. Is it quantity? Here we're going to be speaking about time-wise versus quality, about the stringency of the actual Isur itself, or how great the Isur is. So this is what the Mishnah is speaking about. We have a situation of a sheretz that's found in the Beis HaMikdash. So the first opinion says that the kohen should immediately take out the sheretz. He should use his gartel, the avnet that he wears, should take it out immediately so that there's no situation of the tumah being delayed and staying longer in the Beis HaMikdash. That's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika says. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda and says, no, you should do it differently. You should use a wooden tongs, and the reason for that is because this wooden tongs wouldn't be makabel tumah. You don't want to have extra tumah in the Beis HaMikdash, even though it's going to take longer till you go find such a thing. What's the reason for this machlok? It's the same idea. The first opinion is saying that to delay the tumah, that would be worse. So that's a matter of quantity, a lengthy time. Whereas the second opinion says, no, to have more tumah is worse. And therefore I want to have less things becoming tameh in the Beis HaMikdash. In the next section of the Sicha, the Rebbe now moves on to Pnimi Yisonyanim. So that says the Rebbe to explain the connection between these two rules of Rab Shimon and the difference between them. Alpi Pnimi Yisonyanim. And based on this, we're also going to understand another reason why Rab Shimon holds that when we could allow the person to go into the Tchum Shabbos, we should allow him, we should tell him to go in. So the Rebbe says, it's explained in a number of places, that the malacha of taking something out from one domain into another domain is considered in many, many ways the main idea or the main point, the ultimate, the epitome, the strongest point, the ikar of all the lamites malachis. Where do we see this? So the Rebbe starts off with a medrash. There was a certain heretic that asked Rabbi Akiva, if it's like you say that Hashem honors Shabbos, then Hashem shouldn't make the wind blow on Shabbos, he shouldn't bring down rain on Shabbos, he shouldn't make the grass grow on Shabbos. So Rabbi Akiva responds with a mashal of the concept of Eruv and taking out from different domains. And Rabbi Akiva says that we know that in one domain you wouldn't need to have an Eruv to carry something out, as opposed to two different domains. And Rabbi Akiva goes on to say that for Hashem, the whole world is his domain, it's all his. The question, of course, is that Rabbi Akiva is perhaps only answering how the Hashem, so to speak, could carry from one domain to the other, because the whole world is one domain for Hashem. But what about all the other malachis? What about all the other types of work which have nothing to do with carrying from one reshus to the other? So we must say that this malacha of Eitzah really is the main nekuda, symbolizes and really is the main nekuda of all the malachis of Shabbos, as we'll soon see why that is. And it is the foundation, it's the root from which all the other avis malachis come, and all the toldas and all the shvusim midrabanon. And therefore, since legabe Hashem, it's not possible, the whole idea of taking out from one domain to the other, because the whole world is his. So therefore, once we're missing that yesoid, the basis for all the malachis, the reasoning for all the malachis, therefore there's also no room for all the other malachis which branch out of that, as we'll soon see the explanation. But first, based on this, we can also explain why Masechta Shabbos starts off. The first Mishnah starts off right away with the halachas of carrying from one domain to the other, even though this is a malacha that's counted when the 39 malachas are mentioned in Perek Zayid. This is counted as the last one. Seemingly, Rabbeinu HaKadosh should have first discussed the malachas and then start explaining them in order, as the Mefarshim ask. And yet it starts off with the malacha of carrying out. Because I said before, this malacha really is the main nekuda and the yasoid for all the other lamites malachis. How do we understand this? So the Rebbe says the idea of Shabbos, as we know, it's called Shabbos La'avaya, a day that's completely for Hashem. Yom Tov, it says, is half for Hashem and half lochem. but Shabbos is completely for Hashem. That means the idea of resting on Shabbos, as it says in the Sfarim, is to set in our souls, to really get it inside of us, to inculcate the idea of the Amunah of Chidush Olam, that the Eibishter is the one creating the world, renewing the world, that the Eibishter created the world in Sheish Tzmei Bereishis, on the seventh day Hashem rested, and the same thing today, and now Hashem continues creating the world all the time, Mi'ayin Liyesh, during the 6 days of the week, and on Shabbos. On Shabbos, of course, it's in a different way. Shabbos, Hashem is resting from the speech of the Asara Ma'amoris, and the Chayis is coming from the level of Machshava, as it was on the first Shabbos. And therefore, Hashem is the one and only, one in control over the world. The whole world is under His domain and His Hashgacha Pratis. In other words, even though the world, Olam Eloshen Helam V'Ester, concealment, was in a way that there's room to make a mistake, that the world is just running its natural course, Chas V'Shalom, as if there's no one running the show, Chas V'Shalom, as if there's more than one domain and more than one power in the world. There's domain of good and Kedusha and the domain of bad and Tumah. Nevertheless, when we fulfill the mitzvah of resting on Shabbos, we are setting in our minds this emunah, this true knowledge that really the whole world is one Rishus. It's a Rishus HaYachid. It's a Rishus, a domain of the Yechidah Shalaylam of Hashem, the one and only. If that's the case, we understand that when a person does Malacha on Shabbos, what's being caused is, number one, a weakening in this general emunah, and number two, he's Chas V'Shalom actually increasing the Helen, all of this concealment and this mistake that Chas V'Shalom, there's more than one domain. In other words, being Mechalal Shabbos in any way really is like going out and taking something out from one Rishus to the other Rishus. Going out of the Rishus HaYachid and to bring out as if there's some other Rishus over here. So in other words, this is really the quintessential idea of all the Malachas of Shabbos, is taking things out of Rishus HaYachid, of Hashem's domain. Says the Rebbe, this is what Rabbi Akiva was saying, the whole world is His. Since Legabi Hashem, of course, there's not shaykh to be any sort of concealment from Hashem's perspective on the real Metzias, that everything of the world, even that of evil and bad, is really all part of the Rishus HaYachid. And ultimately it will be revealed even down here, the truth. La'asid Lavi, as the Medrash tells us, that La'asid, when Mashiach comes, a person will want to Chas V'Shalom go and pick a fig on Shabbos. The tree itself will call out and say it's Shabbos. In other words, the world itself will feel and testify that there's only one reality, only Hashem. So again, going back, since Legabe Hashem, it's not even possible, the idea of going out of the one and only domain that everything belongs to Hashem. So the main malacha, that ultimate malacha of carrying outside the domains, is not shaykh. Therefore, all the other malachas are also not shaykh by Hashem. And we can't say that any of these would be considered malacha for Hashem, because again, all of the malachas really are hinging on this one idea. Not to make a chilul Shabbos, as we said before, not to take things out of the domain of the recognition that really Hashem echad. Says the Rebbe, generally all the matters of creation are divided into three general groups, which are also hinted in the three kind of domains of Shabbos. We have the category of inyanim of Kedusha, the things in which we act in a positive way, asay toiv. This is like the Rishus HaYachid, those things that are in domain of Hashem. We have a second category, the opposite extreme, the things that are evil, the things that are asur, which Chassidus refers to as Turei Deproi, the mountains of separation. Them we deal with in the way of Sur Meirah, staying away from it. This is more like the Rishus HaRabim, the opposite of Rishus HaYachid, a place where there's multiplicity, where there's lots of other things, Chas V'Shalom, outside of Hashem. And then we have, of course, the third group, third category, Inyonei Rishus, mundane things, which are an intermediary between the things that are mitzvah and between the things that are not allowed. The avodah in them will be in one of the two ways, either Kadesh Atzmocha b'mutalach, either we sanctify ourselves even in those things that are permissible, so we try to stay away. So that will be one of the ways. Or we try to elevate them to Kedusha, Kol Masach L'Shem Shamayim, Kol Derchecha Be'eyu. Says the Rebbe, similarly is what happens in the domains of Shabbos. We have an area that's not a Rishus HaYachid, not a Rishus HaRabim, it's a courtyard, which has a number of different houses there, or a mavui, an alleyway with a number of different courtyards, or a domain which is called a Carmelis and the like, which these are domains which are between the Rishus HaYachid and the Rishus HaRabim. And we make an Eruv whether an Eruv Chatzeiros or Shetufei Mevoyis and all these different types of things, we could make them into a proper Rishus HaYachid. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand that the concept of an Eruv Tchumen and the idea of an Eruv Chatzeiros really is one and the same. It's all about trying to increase, to extend the Rishus, the domain of Kedusha, the domain of the Yid, that on the one hand, beforehand, it was more limited in quantity, in the area and the space, and now through the Avodah of Eruv, we extended the Rishus. Says the Rebbe, now we could go ahead and connect the two rules that Reb Shimon gave us. The place that the Chachamim permitted for you is something that was l'chatchila yours, which is really the din which we discussed was Tchum Shabbos. The other thing we said was that the only things they allowed you was things that were Yisurim D'Rabbanon, which, as we said before, all the Yisurim of Shabbos, the Malachis of Shabbos, and that which comes out of it, which are the Yisurim D'Rabbanon, we said before, is really going back to that one main nekuda of really carrying out from one domain to the other domain. So in other words, in both of these dinim of Rab Shimon, he's dealing really with the one and the same nekuda, because we said already that the idea of Tchum Shabbos and the idea of all the malachas which boil down to carrying out from one domain to the other is really that same one nekuda. Says the Rebbe, especially that we see a certain common theme between the idea of Tchum Shabbos and the general Yisurim, which we call a Shvus, these Yisurim, these extra things that we rest on Shabbos other than the Lamatas Malachis. And here too, the Rebbe says, we see an idea in the different kinds of dinim in three ways of looking at these dinim in each one of them, and they match each other in quality and quantity. The Rebbe says, as far as Tchum Shabbos, we have three opinions. Either that midoiraisa, 2,000 amos, that's a din doiraisa, you're not allowed to go out. The next opinion is that midoiraisa, you're not allowed to go out 12 mil. Whereas midrabanon, you could only go out 2,000 amos. The third opinion is that the whole concept of Tchum Shabbos is all midrabanon. The same idea we really have regarding with these dinim of Shavuos, these extra resting on Shabbos. Either that the whole idea of Shavuos is minat Torah, the Torah said Tishbois, and the Chachamim are explaining to us in which other areas we need to rest. Another way of looking at it is that there are certain Shavuosim that are midoraisa, and the Chachamim explain to them. And then there are some that are midrabanon. And then there's a third way of looking at it, that really the whole concept of Shavuos is only midrabanon, and when the Torah says Tishbois, the Chachamim are relying on what's called an asmachta to give us other things, but not that these other things have any actual basis in midoraisa. So we compared, in the last section, we compared the general idea of Tchum Shabbos and not doing Melacha on Shabbos. Because in both of them, the general idea again is that we want to make sure that there's the Rishus HaKedusha, and if anything, we try to expand the Rishus HaKedusha, not to allow any negative influences, no Chilul Shabbos, etc. But the Rebbe says the truth is there's a very, very big difference between them. In fact, they're even opposites of each other. That is, when we speak about the Isra of Malacha of Shabbos, the idea is that when a person does Malacha, he's desecrating Shabbos. He's sort of making like a void. He's making a place where there's no room for the Kedusha of Shabbos. He's desecrating the Kedusha of Shabbos. In other words, when he does a Malacha, he's bringing in a negative force, a Klippa into Shabbos. What about the idea of going out of Tchum Shabbos? Here, seemingly, it's the other way around. He's not bringing something mundane, something weekday into Shabbos. On the contrary, he's sort of taking out the idea of Shabbos into the place of Klippa. He's going out from the space of the Rishus HaYachid, from the place of the city, from the place of the Kedushadika place, and he's going outside with that. As the Rebbe explains, every single Yid, even a Bur, even a total Amoritz, has the Kedusha of Shabbos inside of him. And when he goes out of the Tchum, out of the area of Kedusha, he's taking out with himself, he's taking out also the Kedusha of Shabbos to the outside place, to the place of Klipos. So again, as opposed to before bringing Klippa and negativity into Shabbos, here he's seemingly taking the Shabbos and trying to extend it into the place of the Klipos. The Rebbe says we cannot compare this to the idea of Tosfos Shabbos that we know is supposed to add to Shabbos in the beginning of Shabbos and the end of Shabbos in time. And seemingly, why shouldn't we say that just like you could add in time, maybe we could add Shabbos in space. We could take Shabbos and bring it outside the Tchum Shabbos. So the Rebbe says, of course, it's very, very different. There, the Torah is commanding us and giving us the koyach to add from the weekday, the time that's close to Shabbos, to add it to Shabbos and to transform it into Kedusha. Whereas here, going outside the Tchum, of course, we can't do that. And since he is in the place that's outside the Tchum of Kedusha, a place of Klipos, this is a place where you can't bring in the Kedusha of Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, now we're going to come back to the point that we said before, that we're going to understand another reason why Reb Shimon says you should go back into the Tchum. Says the Rebbe, from this we understand that this Isur of being outside the Tchum is going to be every moment you're outside the Tchum. That means it's not only the moment you crossed over the Tchum, the border, but rather as a result of the fact that you are outside the Tchum, the domain, the area of Kedusha, in a place where you're connected to Klippa. So now we understand even better what Reb Shimon says, that if it's permissible in some way, then you should go back into the Tchum. You need to go back, so that you shouldn't remain in the place of Klippos. Says the Rebbe in Sivches, from all of this, like all matters of Torah, there's a hira also in the general avoid of a person. The main mitzias of a yid is, of course, his nefesh olikis, a chelik alikami ma'al mamash. Just like Hashem himself is completely uplifted, exalted, and removed from all the idea of the source and everything of the creation of the worlds, to the extent that we say that the Asara Ma'amoris, the 10 utterances with which Hashem created the world, compared to the king, to Hashem, are considered milindeh, yoita, they're like mundane things, simple things, words of a simpleton. So too is Lagabe the Yid, that a Yid on his own is completely higher than the world. The Torah told him, Sheishas Yomim Tav, 6 days you should work, get involved with your work, and so on. And in this, he's also similar to his creator. Just like Hashem had to contract himself, so to speak, to create the Olamois, so to Lahavdil, the person, the Adam, which is compared, Adam Elyoin, is created in a way that he has to contract himself to get involved in the world. If so, we understand that the way the Yid gets involved in the mundane things and the worldly things is a great descent for him. But what's the essence of the Yid himself? That's Shabbos. He's completely resting. He's completely above the idea of these mundane work. And therefore, these two dinim of Shabbos, on the one hand, not doing malacha, and as well as not going out of the tchum, we have a very, very general leirah in the conduct of the Yid, even during the weekdays, because in essence, again, a Yid is Shabbos. What is the leirah? So the Rebbe says like this: the Isur of not doing malacha on Shabbos, what does that mean in the conduct of the person? Is not bringing in worldly things into your mind, into your seichel. The Rebbe says, and Chassidus explains the moichin, the level of the intellect, that's the level of Shabbos. That means to say that even though, yes, I need to get involved in the work, you don't have to get involved with your deepest and greatest koiches. You only use your external koiches for that, but not your higher and inner capacities and capabilities. Because all of our highest faculties need to be completely designated and made holy for Torah and Avodah. As the Pasuk says, Yigia kapecha ki soichel, it's the toil of your hands, but not the toil of your mind and your heart. When a person does bring in these mundane things into his mind, into his heart, into his Shabbos, he's making this void, this vacancy, this inyan of chilul Shabbos, so to speak. He's making a cholol in the idea of Shabbos. He's making a place where there is a lack of missing of the feeling for godliness. Because if the person would really know that it's only the bracha of Hashem that makes you rich, and doing business is only a keli for the bracha of Hashem, as it says, then you wouldn't put your head into the business. You wouldn't be trying to find all sorts of tactics and all sorts of things which are of no use, because it's Hashem's bracha that makes you rich. And on the contrary, all of this extra preoccupation in the business, which is disturbing you from Torah v'Avodah, that's going to stop the person from being a proper keli for the bracha of Hashem. So that's point number one, not to bring in all the negativity into your Shabbos. Again, Shabbos, meaning your seichel and so on, your highest koiches, and don't bring in your mundane things into there. That these inyanim have to be exclusive for your Torah and Avodah. Now the Rebbe says there's another point. Even if you didn't bring in your business into your Shabbos, you need to know there's another caution, another warning. You're not allowed to go outside the tchum. What would this mean? That in the time of Shabbos, that means the time that you're spending on Torah and mitzvahs, You need to make sure that even your most external koiches are not going outside the tchum. In other words, you don't take your feet, you don't take your external koiches outside the inyan of Torah and mitzvahs. That means the Torah and mitzvahs have to permeate and have to be involved in every single part of the person. And so too, when he's involved in tefillah and doing a mitzvah, you have to be, the whole person completely has to be there from head to toe. Don't allow yourself to walk outside that tchum. The Rebbe concludes the Sicha by saying, we said before that the last Mishnah, Masechta Eruvin, is dealing with the din of a sheretz that was found in the Beis HaMikdash. That means to say that even after the person fulfilled all the heiros of Masechta Shabbos and Masechta Eruvin, he rested his mind from being involved in all the mundane things, and he was careful making sure that his feet are only found in the side of Kedusha. Nevertheless, there's still a possibility that sometimes there's a sheretz in his mikdash, a dead sheretz. What's the idea of a sheretz? A sheretz means not a tumor that's coming from the person himself, it's coming from the outside. It's this dead animal, this dead rodent, or whatever it is. In other words, since the world is not a purified place yet, because of the coarseness of the world, there's still a possibility that there could be a sheretz in his own personal Beis HaMikdash. Something had gotten in there, even though on his own maybe he's not shaykh to this. And even though this tumor is not really his and it's not his fault seemingly, nevertheless there's no argument, you definitely need to get rid of it. The question is only, how do you get rid of it? Do you get rid of it with your own gartel, with your own piece of clothes? That means to say, do you get rid of the tumor by an avoid of really getting involved with it, with your levushim? In other words, you really clothed, you put yourself into it, immediately just getting involved with it. Even though there is a concept, as the Alter Rebbe tells us, misabik imenuval, misnavel gamkin, if you start dealing with a dirty person and fighting with him, you get dirty as well. Nevertheless, it might be worth it just not to allow the tumah to stay there for another moment. That's opinion number one. But then there's another opinion that we need to be careful not to touch the sheretz even with our clothes. Go look for a wooden tongs and get rid of it. Or as it says in Tanya, just make yourself as if you don't hear it, as if you don't see it. Don't touch it. Don't get involved with it. And you need a special time when you could deal with these things. Because, what's the reason? We don't want to get extra involved with the tumah. You don't want to get dirty through it. You don't want to get soiled through it. Even though, yes, it may take time because of that to get involved with the tikkun. Either way, says the Rebbe, and especially now, that we're holding so close to Bias HaMashiach, and kol kalakitz in all time frames and all time limits are up already. And ein adavar tali ella b'tshuva. And tshuva, as we know, is b'shayta chada b'riga chada in one moment, and tshuva me'ava rabba transforms from tamei to tor. So now definitely, says the Rebbe, it's the schus and the obligation for each and every one of us to get rid of the ruach hatumah min haaretz by spreading the mayonis chutza, and to bring quicker ka'asi mar b'karev mamash.